Welcome back, everybody. This is Rodrigo Farner with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as a reminder, this episode and all of our episodes are brought to you all by American IRA LLC. They're your local self-directed IRA custodian here in Asheville. If you haven't checked them out already, highly encourage you to do so. Today, on this episode, we're going to be talking about money and just some different thought processes of saving versus investing, and how do you know to do which one and how you should prioritize, maybe your outlook on it. I'm excited. I've got some questions here for our guest. But without further ado, let me introduce you. Tony Pierfelice, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Asheville is a very unique place, as you know, because you're here and I'm here, but are you from Asheville?
I'm not from Asheville. I'm from the Midwest.
Okay.
Grew up in Ohio, spent 25 years in Michigan, and came down here by choice.
By choice? Yeah, well, it's too cold in Michigan, right?
Yeah.
So what was that transition like, and how did you decide, if it was by choice, why did you choose Asheville?
Came down here on business 25 years ago to the Wilson Art Plant outside of Hendersonville.
Oh, okay.
They put me up at the Grove. It was a very nice place to come and see Asheville for the first time. Was already thinking about retirement then, and knew I wanted someplace that had geographic diversity, change of seasons, but not the winters.
Right.
So decided this was an area and started coming down here for vacations, and then started looking for property.
Very cool. So how long ago did you move here then?
Bought property 12 years ago out on Lake James.
Okay.
Was looking several years before that, and built a house and was coming down for several months out of the year about 10 years ago.
Okay.
And then moved down into town about 4 years ago.
Okay, great. So kind of leads into the next question, as I'd mentioned to you as we were setting this up. Curious about the money side of things. We've talked a lot on the show about investing in real estate, being an agent in real estate, just a different variety of things. But one of the missing components that's been we've talked about, it's been referenced, but we haven't gone in depth, is you need money to get started typically. And wanted to kind of see your approach, because you haven't been in real estate your whole life, right?
I've been in it in different ways my whole life.
Right. So that'd be perfect, right? So knowing when do you make the plunge, and how do you start making the decisions for retirement or the long-term vision versus trying to, quote unquote, feed yourself today, and how do you balance those things? So I guess that's a long way of saying, when did you start really making long-term decisions for your retirement, roughly from a money standpoint versus, just focusing on the day-to-day?
A long time ago. I had a non-traditional college education. It took me about 10 years to get through college.
Okay.
Putting myself through, not really having college as a priority. I was in construction, so I had my own business. When I made the transition from my own business, I went back and got an MBA because I was tired of collecting money primarily. And when I came out and got my first real job, I started thinking long-term then. Started maxing out the 401k, my
contributions.
Whatever I could to defer. And also my nature is I don't like debt. I'll use debt strategically only if I don't need it, if that makes sense.
Well, could you give an example of what that would look like?
In my investing, I pay cash for everything.
Okay.
And there's a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of advantage and opportunities by having cash. But then after I get into something and I get comfortable with it, I will then go out and get financing on it, mortgage loans.
Okay.
Take advantage of, really conventional financing, low interest rates, and then arbitrage that and either reinvest it or even keep it in the stock market.
Gotcha.
So I only bought one car ever on time. I pay cash for everything. So when I say I don't have credit card debt, don't have mortgages on my houses, I just waited and paid cash.
So it's a little bit non-traditional or non-normal, right? How did you learn that, or where did that stem from?
Well, two things. I learned that from seeing my family have some financial issues. My parents were sort of would spend a little bit more than what they were spending where they wanted to be, not where they could afford.
Gotcha.
And that was as I was growing up, and I saw some of the challenges that would bring. And then, I mean, the other thing, to be honest, was I had a very good career. I lucked into a consulting business, started my own consulting business that was very lucrative, working with companies in financial distress, which rewarded me very well. I worked way too many hours, so on top of a good hourly rate, I was working some ungodly number of hours a year. Sort of had the farmer's approach. It was like I kept thinking I needed to make hay while the sun was shining, thinking that I don't know where my next job's going to come from.
Gotcha.
And 20 years of never not working was like hindsight, I should have not worked so much. But
fair enough. Yeah, that's I definitely am in the work as much as you can. I'm like, I'm still young. Like, like just work a little longer, and then things will like even out in the back end or whatever.
And they're starting to even out.
Yeah.
I could have stopped about 5 years sooner, but.
Fair enough. So what are you doing now? I mean, I'm guessing you don't probably just sit on your laurels and like kick your feet up and are just doing nothing. I'm sure.
I've pretty much wound down the consulting business, but I'm on the board of directors of several small companies.
Okay.
So I keep my finger in that, which I've enjoyed doing and keeps my mind active. I had some rental properties as I got into my various real estate things. I had picked up some rental properties, and I've sold those because I don't like working with tenants. And I'm doing private money lending now, which gives me a little more flexibility and you don't have the day-to-day stuff to deal with.
Yeah. What would be private lending for somebody who's not familiar with that? What would be the best explanation?
I'm lending money to other real estate investors that are either doing flips, long-term holds, rental, development, new construction. Usually younger people, because I'm also providing a mentoring role to many of them. And so I provide the money, they go out and do all the work.
And you got a couple phone calls in between to help make the decisions pan out correctly?
Yes. I do two types of deals. I'll do interest-only deals, which are a little more hands-off. I'm getting budgets and things up front and then funding to the budget. I've also do some equity participations, which is a little more hands-on, and I'm intimately involved. And with my new construction, I'm actually dispersing all vendor checks.
Okay, very cool. So I have a question on that, right? Obviously, you believe in real estate because you mentioned you've been in it through your whole life, right?
Yes.
And now you're on a side where you're helping, other people get started and build their own careers, life, business, etc., using debt. But you have a very different, approach to debt. So what is if you're mentoring them and stuff, what is that conversation like when helping somebody be like, hey, this is a good opportunity for you to take a loan on, and how's that risk assessment go usually?
The risk assessment from their perspective?
From my perspective, both, right?
Okay.
Because you're doing it from your end of you're like, well, is this going to be a loan I'm going to get back, right? Essentially.
It's always yes.
Yeah.
I don't do loans because I want to come in and take over the property.
But the flip side of it is you said you do some mentorship, right? So I'm sure some of the conversations are like, hey, this is a good deal, like awesome job in lining this up. And I'm sure sometimes they're like, hey, I see what you're doing here. I'm just a little I'm a little worried that maybe it's an over-leveraged deal or whatnot. How do you?
I've come out and said that before.
Yeah.
And if it's an over-leveraged deal, I'm not going to lend into it. So when I've said that, it's usually because I don't think this isn't right for me, and I don't think it's right for you, and here's why I don't think it's right for you. I encourage the people I'm working with to put money aside. I basically encourage them to get to the point where they don't need me, because I go through the cost of money. But as you said, some of them haven't been as fortunate as I have, and so they're going to need to borrow to get going in real estate. So, it's a necessary evil, but what they need to have a plan is to get to the point where they can minimize their borrowing, because, I'm expensive.
Yeah. It's very popular, as they say, to OPM, right? Other people's money. What do you think the balancing point of that is? Like, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I've acquired that's long-term is like owner finance stuff, you know, and any of the flips that we do, you know, we're doing private money as well. What's the school of thought of being like, hey, maybe you should just not do anything, save, work really hard, get a good job, try to stockpile. It might take you longer to get started, but then it's going to be smoother road, or how do you balance the opportunity cost, I guess, of waiting but using your own cash versus, you know, borrowing?
I think for most people who are working a 8-to-5 job, they would probably never get to the point of having enough built up to make that move. So, you know, it wasn't the path I took, but I think, you know, using other people's money for deals that make sense is the way for a younger person to get into real estate. You know, and as you're aware, it's all about, you make your money when you buy the property. And that's where I'm dealing with people that's what you need to look for. You need to look for the opportunities. Don't rush out and buy a property just because you've got someone that's going to lend you money and you want to do something. You need to be patient and find the right initial purchase.
I've definitely gotten myself in trouble because of buying something, just being excited to do something just because financing was available. That doesn't necessarily always makes a good deal.
No,
and personal experience, yeah.
I see people coming out, a lot of people coming out of the classes too.
Yeah.
They get all excited, they spend a lot of money for classes, which I don't encourage, by the way.
Which classes, like
any of them? These $30,000 classes where they're going to go and show you this stuff, and my advice to people is take that $30,000 and try and do a deal.
Right.
And even if you fail, you will learn more in your failure get your $30,000 worth by taking the class.
That's how I got started. I don't know if I've ever told you. I went to I heard a Rich Dad Poor Dad commercial on the radio. I went, drank the Kool-Aid, went to their 2-hour course, went to their 2-day course, signed up, went to their 3-day. I never did it like 30,000. I forget how much mine was, like 5,000 or 7,000 to get started. And the only good thing that did was like my whole family was like, I can't believe you spent $5,000 or $7,000 on this scam. And I was like, oh, I'm going to show you guys. And that was like the only benefit. All the learnings come from just like running around and trying to do it and connect with people. What when you're working with somebody who's like, hey, Tony, I got a loan, what are you going through with them to? What questions are you asking for them to see if they're in a good spot to, you know, take the risk or to move forward with the opportunity?
For one thing, I've usually vetted the individual already. So I've talked to them, asked them what their plan is, get an understanding of their situation, what their experience is, because it's, you know, at the end of the day, I am collateral based, but behind that collateral is the person that's going to do the deal.
Arguably is worth more, right?
Yes, because the right person can make a bad deal come back. As long as they recognize it and are willing to take advice and work hard to do it. So the first thing is I've vetted the person, and then we start talking about the property. You know, okay, what are the comps? You know, if it's real cheap, I always have more questions because, you know, why did you get this opportunity? Why is it so cheap? What are you missing that other people might have missed? And a lot of times there's nothing. I mean, you see that in the wholesale. It's just the wholesaler got a great deal. He's just looking to make a reasonable profit and flip it. And for some reason, the person's selling it way below market.
Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. You know, right? Real estate's timing thing a lot.
Yes. So understanding that and understanding that there is room to get their after repair value, I want to see a detailed budget on what they want to put into it and the strategy for getting the work done, marketing it.
And getting it out of it.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. What this is, I guess, a little bit more broader, not just real estate specific, but what sort of approach or, you know, have you seen for yourself personally and just other people you've worked with? You know, you've moved around a little bit, you got to consult, so you got to see a lot of people make decisions around money. And I didn't know if, like, as somebody, you know, I'm in my late 20s, right, or somebody who's getting started, what's the overall, like, balance approach versus, like, hey, how much should you save and how much should you actively be trying to invest? I know it's going to be very broad and not giving advice, but maybe just sharing your perspective. So
define for me saving and investing.
So I would say saving would be like having money in your bank account, in the savings account that's there for, like, you know, your quote-unquote rainy day fund, as they call it. That'd be like saving. It's just there. And then maybe investing would be like, I've got my account over here, I'm putting money in here, trying to stockpile X amount so I can go do Y.
Okay. In my situation, I hit with the consulting, which was always steady.
Yeah.
I would save less than what, like I tell my children to save.
Okay.
Tell my children it's 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
You want to have 3 to 6 months of cash, and something hiccups, you can make a
For your personal or for both?
for
right?
personal.
Okay.
To make a life transition,
Right.
even like if you need to move across country. I always took that down a little bit,
Okay.
but then I once again was in a different circumstance.
Right.
And then you invest everything else. And investment doesn't necessarily mean real estate.
Right.
You know, I forgot the name of the book. It's the guy Warren Buffett always quotes.
Oh, well, I know like
It's basic portfolio theory.
Okay. Well, I was going to say the one I read was Money
Benjamin
Masters,
Graham?
but that was by,
Yes,
which one is it?
Benjamin Graham.
Benjamin
Oh.
Graham.
The Intelligent Investor.
Yes. And the paraphrase, I read it so long ago, it's just basic portfolio theory, which is you don't put all your money into one segment. You spread it around and you mitigate a lot of risk that way.
Gotcha.
So I've been a firm believer in that through my whole life too.
I want to come back to that, but
Okay.
you said 3 to 6 months. So in your thought process, you stockpile 3 to 6 months first, aggressively, and then aggressively, quote unquote, invest after that once you kind of get the
Correct.
cushion built
Yeah,
up?
once you got the cushion built up.
Is those 3 to 6 months, is that kind of, do you do like best case scenario as far as what your like monthly personal burn rate is? Or do you do kind of like,
I look at, you know, if something happened and I could cut every expense, discretionary expense to the bone, what do I need?
okay, so you do like, it's not to keep your lifestyle the same.
No.
It's like worst case scenario, I cut everything else, bare minimum, that's what we're working with.
Yes,
Okay, so that's probably a lot less than most people think.
correct, it is. But most people don't pull the cord fast enough if something goes wrong.
Oh.
And that's my experience in my consulting business too. I'm working with companies in financial distress. It's not like I walked in and they had a problem yesterday.
Right.
They had a problem 6 months, a year, 5 years ago. And they were just waiting and thinking, too often just thinking something's going to
get better.
change. It's going to get better on its own. So you have to be prepared that if something goes wrong, you're going to make that lifestyle change immediately. And you know, there's ramifications regarding friends, family,
Right.
of showing that things have changed, and
Right.
you're taking it. I think most people are afraid of what will people think,
Right.
and not realizing that most people, the people they should appreciate, will think that's a great thing what they're
Would
doing.
support it, yeah. They'd be
Yes.
like, wow, you're so smart. Like, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is there a point as you were, growing your own portfolio and investing more, and that you had a shift in priorities, or that there are certain things that you were thinking of that were important? I know you said the working thing, and I'm just personally curious about that a lot because I like working. I enjoy it for the most part, and I am trying to make a more concerted effort to be more present in other things outside of work. But that's not always easy because it seems like, opportunity cost. I was like, well, what happens if, somebody else is catching up or whatever? What was that internal conversation with you?
Oh gosh, I had that opportunity cost. Work on a consulting basis where you have an hourly rate,
Right.
and your mind is just always looking at, gosh, if I don't work that hour, I lost $350. And it's like, and it warps you though.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a positive thing.
I can imagine it can be super negative.
Because
for sure.
you're always thinking about that, gosh, if I don't
Yeah.
do that. Or, my thing would be, well, I could drive faster and afford the speeding tickets because I'm going to get more done and make more money.
Interesting, yeah.
So it's got some positive aspects.
Was that something you struggled with the whole time, or did you get a point where it kind of, you got like peace, or you got peace, inner peace about like, okay, like I'm working now and I'm just not going to, and it reconciled itself?
I would take time off, but a common misconception of people that don't work for themselves is that they're in control of their schedule and their time. And if you have your own business, you're really not. You can plan to do things and try and get stuff done ahead and block out some time, but at the end of the day, especially I'm dealing with companies, you get a phone call and they can't make payroll the next day. You can't just say, oh, I'm on vacation. I'm sorry, I'll get back to you next week, because they won't be there next week. So, I've been on vacations and had to delve into it, shunt the vacation aside.
Right.
But at the same point in time, I've always made time to take vacations. Had some fortunate gaps. You know, if I didn't have work, I would
try to take advantage of
family time. Yeah, I would jump on that opportunity and spend time with the family. We'd do impromptu vacations.
Right.
So that was very important too.
As you were going through all this, did you have a vision of like what life looked like when you got to this age and you were retired or whatever? Because I know you travel a lot, you bike a lot, you do all these things. I'm like, that sounds great. Like from a lifestyle picture, it's exciting. It's definitely something like look up towards and be like, okay, that's a good standard to aim for.
Yeah, these are all the things that I thought I would be doing. And pretty much I was right on. I mean, the percentage has changed, the intensity has changed. Thought I'd be fly fishing. I haven't really got into the fly fishing yet.
Just because?
I got into the cycling more than the fly fishing. So it's that's what I mean. The percentage, I'm still spending as much time outside, having fun and being outside. And I still got all my fly fishing gear. So I bought, when I had money, part of my thought process too was I would go out and buy things. Because getting back to what I talked about, when the money wasn't coming in, I knew by my nature I would have a tough time spending it.
Yeah.
So I made what I call investments in myself for my recreation. I went out and bought, I've got all the fly fishing gear ready to go.
How did you know when it was time to be like, okay, I'm going to pull the plug on working? Was it a number, a monthly income? Was it a gut feel? Like, how was that decision making to just be like, hey, like this is good?
It was a decision on I was tired of working. I had the money years earlier that I should have quit years earlier. I was still enjoying it as much. But I decided it was time to wind things down. And my initial strategy was to work part-time in the consulting business. And I put that into place, and that's when I started coming down here for longer terms out at the lake. But then I started finding out that my administrative efforts were very high compared to my billable rate.
Oh, when you're working part-time, just the ripple effect of it was...
Well, I was still doing the same, I'm still keeping books, I'm still doing sales and marketing. My overhead, unbillable time, didn't go down at all. So whereas before I was spending 5% of my time unbillable and everything else was billable, because one thing is when you got billable, you let some of the non-billable just not get done. When I started winding things down to reduce my time, my billable suddenly and unbillable became equal. And I was working, so I'm working 40 hours a week instead of 80. So that's a good thing. But suddenly I'm looking at it and going, gosh, my return
I'm only getting paid for 20 of these
hours
there. Yeah.
And it was like, well, that doesn't make sense. So I made the decision that, if the work came in, I'd do it, but I was going to stop doing the sales and marketing, stop doing all those efforts to find more work. And in my business, I had to take little jobs because you didn't know what would be a big job. So
so some of the big jobs started out small, essentially?
Almost every big job started out very small.
So it's hard to project what type of job you were getting into.
You don't know at all what you're going to get into. You walk in, what you think is a little thing, and I mentioned the payroll. I don't know how many times I come in for a meeting on Wednesday, get an introduction, and one of my first questions is cash. What's your cash position? What's the cash flow? And I'd find out, well, they said you'd help me. I can't meet payroll tomorrow or Friday.
And you're just like, whoa.
It's like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that. And so you're jumping into it full swing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know. It's super interesting because the real estate for me has always been about like the long-term plan as far as how do you get to, I don't even know personally a ton of clarity on what that number is or how to know when to like pull the plug and do something different based off of, where you want to be. But the balance of just like saving, I struggle with saving because I'm always like, well, there's always something we could buy or invest. In theory, the money's going to grow. is there anything that you found to be helpful to like help you stay a little bit more disciplined? Or is it just like you just kind of like have to draw a hard line in the sand, get some good accountability, and then just make it, kind of impossible to cross that line because of the safeguards you've set up?
To me, it was always peace of mind that if I didn't have some money set aside in savings, I didn't have peace of mind. So that bothered me.
Right.
So my self-discipline came to strictly a comfort level.
Right.
So I wanted to have enough set aside that I didn't have to worry about if something hiccuped tomorrow.
Right.
Everyone's different.
Yeah.
I think it's self-discipline, and too many people don't have self-discipline anymore for a whole variety of things, not just financial savings.
Yeah, fair. Well, as wrapping up, is there anything that you would say that we haven't maybe touched on when it just comes to like good intentional, approach or mindset around money that you'd like to share?
Develop a written plan for your life.
Okay. Do you mind expanding on that?
You need to have, if you don't set goals and milestones, you'll never achieve where you want to go. And so setting goals, milestones, having a strategy to get there is very important. And then writing it down just firms it up. And when I say write it down, I don't mean 50-page something. It can be bullet points. But knowing your long-term objective and then identifying what it's going to take to get there. And then putting some milestones in. Whether milestones can have some dates attached to them, or they can have numbers attached to it as far as savings.
Something that you can check it off as you get there. So it leads me to, I guess, might be the final question, but I'm wondering is, if somebody's like super overwhelmed by this conversation, they're like, I don't have a consulting job, I don't have like solid income as it is right now, I don't like, what's the good, just like, hey, what's the first thing to focus on to start getting those, money orders organized and create some intentionality around it?
Well, a lot of the people I'm working with have a day job. And several of them, we've been having a discussion as to, when do I leave the day job?
Right.
And it gets into some of the things we just talked about, when you've got some savings built up, and looking at some of the macroeconomic things too. So it's, don't give up on the day job and control your expenses and put as much aside as you can, because, until you can replace that weekly income from some type of definitive cash flow stream from your investing, you're not ready to leave. And involve your spouse in the decision.
Yes, I can imagine that would be important.
Yes.
Awesome. Tony, well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's super insightful. I had some personal questions and just some general topics that are just, they always seem to come up in this space as far as like, when do you invest and how do you save, et cetera. So thank you for sharing.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, there you go, guys. If you have any other questions, comment below. If you've had this conversation with somebody or with your spouse, share it with them. We'd love to hear from you. If you could give us a rating on iTunes, we'd definitely appreciate it. Until next week, you guys, take care.